Hello and welcome to Heavy Metal WRX. My name is Wace, and today, as you can see, finally we have another tuner talk going. I know people have been asking about a tuner talk since last year, and even though there hasn't, I feel like not a whole lot of stuff that's happened, there's some very specific things that I wanted to talk to you guys about today, and more specifically ask Graham, because he surprisingly, or rather, I guess unsurprisingly, has worked with a lot of this stuff over the last year, so he has some really good first-hand knowledge on what we're going to be talking about. Most of this stuff is not relevant to the daily community, but I'd say we're going to see a lot of this stuff happen in shops and some people who are pushing their car pretty far. This is where these things are going to be pretty relevant. So I'm really excited to talk more about it. Also, I guess I do want to let you guys know I work at the shop Ecotech. We do have a website where we sell tons of parts. So if you're looking for intakes, if you're looking for wheels or any kind of parts from Perrin, Cobb, Mishimoto, AMS, definitely check out the website. Definitely let me know. And if you're looking for an e-tune, I'll have Graham's website down below, or you can come over to Ecotech for a actual dyno tune, and you can hang out with me as well. Graham, thank you so much for coming back to another tuner talk. I know it's been a very long time since the last time you and I have spoken. There's been all kinds of cool things that have been out.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, thanks for having me back. It's great to catch back up again.
Yeah, people have been asking, even last year, they're like, hey, what happened to the tuner talks? I just told them, I said, look, everybody's been busy. I've been busy. But while we've all been busy, Cobb has been busy. IAG has been busy, Nostrum has been busy. So I want to get into a couple of these things. I want to start with the biggest thing physically, and I think for the future, is IAG did drop the FA24 1,000 horsepower closed deck block, which is, I have no real experience with it. We actually got one at the shop. So I wanted you to kind of give us an idea, like what your experience has been using their closed decks this whole time. And what do you think, where is this going to land? Is it really going to make 1,000 horsepower out of this thing?
Well, okay, so IAG is definitely, they are the #1 engine builder that we use and we trust. We have a great relationship with them, both in EJ engines, FA20 engines, been working with them for a long time. So yeah, I'm excited that they released a closed deck, and I think it's fantastic. As far as, are we gonna see 1,000 horsepower? Not anytime soon. The challenge is we still need to figure out heads, and also still need to figure out how to get the engine to rev. There's an oil pump limitation on both the FA20 and the FA24. So IAG invested in a really neat machine called a Spintron. What they can do is they can put the engine on this machine and basically spin it to any RPM and put sensors all over it and study how the oil pressure does at different RPMs and see where oil goes and doesn't go. So they've learned that we have to really back off on, we can't get too carried away with RPMs on these FA engines right now until we address the oil supply, which means that you're trying to get 1,000 horsepower, you're going to put a big turbo on it. You can only set a turbo with, at a point with a low enough RPM, right? Yeah. So if you want 1,000 horsepower turbo, it's not going to start making boost pressure until we're getting close to maybe 6,000 RPMs or more. If you can't rev that out to 9,000 RPMs, it's not going to work. So there's some more technical hurdles to get over before we're ever going to see that kind of power, I think. Not to mention, it's going to have to be on a standalone ECU. It's going to have a supplemental port injection system to go with the direct injection system. It's just going to be very complicated to get there. Cams, head work, letting everything breathe. The FA24 by itself, even in stock form, is a fantastic engine for making some good horsepower, up to like the 500s, but it's going to be more challenging. Every direct injection engine gets more challenging as you go up. So yeah, I think it's a great thing to have. I think eventually people are going to start breaking these engines or wanting to go maybe to 600 horsepower. You got to get an STI trans in there, but so it's a good thing to have. But honestly, I don't know how quickly we're going to really be needing them and utilizing them. I still, to this point, don't have a customer who's broken an engine yet that I'm aware of.
Really?
I've got some guys pushing into the mid 400s now and taking these things to the road course and road racing them like that, just trying to see where the breaking point is. And as long as we're careful with the tuning and down at the peak torque and ramp the power in like I do with my tuning, these things hold up and they can rip at the high RPMs.
That's really good to know. I assume this is on upgraded turbos.
This is upgraded turbos, yes. Turbo. Yeah, okay. The stock turbo still, you really can only push that so far. But yeah, now that we've got these upgraded turbos that are available from Boost Lab, SoCal, Blausch, we're starting to tune more of those and starting to kind of send guys up to those higher power levels with the appropriate fuel upgrades, which we're going to get to here.
I'm actually glad to hear that because that's still another question that people actually ask me directly. This, hey, has anybody reached out to you about like blown engines? And outside of maybe like two instances, I haven't heard a single person say that. And I
Yeah.
actually want to touch back this thing that you said about IG. This is called the Spintron.
Hmm.
No, that actually sounds really awesome. I was actually talking to Dewey about coming out there one of these days. That excites me even more to see something like that. That would be really cool to go back and see.
Yep.
So you're talking about all this stuff. You're talking about the heads. You're talking about cams. You're talking about fuel. All that. These are actually great points because you're right. There's actually really nothing that I've seen in the community. I know that there's a FA24 uh, NA engine that I saw somebody put like different heads on there, but like it didn't do anything. Like it didn't. There was no change to it or whatever.
Yeah.
So a lot to do. But now the things that we have some fueling upgrades. So Nostrum, I guess IAG is working with the Nostrum, so they came out with a pump and some injectors. Which talk to me a little bit more about the injectors. Is it kind of rare to see upgraded injectors for DIT systems?
Yes and no. In the in the uh, in the import scene, especially like let's just say Japanese imports. Yeah, it's kind of rare because it's been kind of slow. It's been slow for Subaru to get to direct injection and some of the other Japanese companies. Whereas, German direct injection has been around for a while. Even American direct injection has been around for a while, like in use in Chevys, for example, like the LT engine in a C7 Corvette. So it's pretty common and pretty easy to find upgraded direct injectors for a lot of like Ford EcoBoost stuff or Chevy LT stuff. But nobody was really working on things like this for Subaru or really even Toyota, to my knowledge. But I mean, Subaru is the application here that we care about. So yes and no. No, it's not rare to see direct injection upgrades, but yes, it's kind of rare for Subaru. And there's really only a couple companies that have been working on it. Nostrum was one of them. So we worked with their injectors on the FA20, and unfortunately, in my testing, they only give you maybe like a 10% increase. But we actually got involved with the beta testing on Nostrum's pump and injectors, and they actually give about 19 to 20% more fuel volume.
Wow.
And the pump helps keep up. So these cars I'm talking about that are running mid 400 horsepower and up, even into the upper 400s on E85, they're utilizing that pump and injector set to get there.
I see.
On higher ethanol blends.
Yeah, but man, at $1,700 a piece, that's a pretty steep price for that.
It is. I mean, this is not a cheap platform to get horsepower out of. When you're spending that much money just to get to the 400s, that's painful because if you look back at an old EJ engine STI, I say old, kind of jokingly, but you look at an EJ and you can just buy some, 1300cc injectors for $700 and get a fuel pump for another $200 and you're good to go for like 600, at least 550, right? No problem. Direct injection is super expensive because I think we've covered this in the past, that the equipment and the technology to develop this stuff is extremely expensive. So it all just follows along. It's very, very high precision, really high pressure, no room for error type stuff. So it's expensive.
Now, so that's usually like what I've been telling people, that if you want to go into the 400s. Now, side question, what about some of these people who maybe just want to run 93 and have basic bolt-ons and maybe get like a smaller stock location turbo? Can these people still go get through without having to get an injector or injector upgrade and fuel pump upgrade?
Oh yeah. The stock fuel system on pump gas has a lot of headroom. So we can definitely get there, no problem. So we've had some guys that have done upgraded turbos and, they don't have E85 or they don't want to use E85, but they want that power that gets closer to 400. We can do that with some good 93 octanes, some good bolt-ons and an upgraded turbo. There's no fuel limits there at all in that case.
It's just the ethanol is where things get a little tricky.
Yeah, with the ethanol, that's where the fuel volume requirements of E85, the higher the blend, you get upwards of 30 to 35% more fuel requirement. That adds up really fast and it really stretches those DI systems pretty thin, both on the high pressure side, just trying to physically get the fuel to the injectors, and then also how much can get sprayed in when the injector opens. That's based on the injector flow rate. So you have two limiting factors in that case.
So through all you guys, as you said, you were doing some beta testing, all this. So it's safe to say you guys saw great results. It's definitely something that you would recommend people if they want to as time comes, people are starting to push their cars a little
Yep.
bit more. Maybe if they're not even getting an FA24 1,000 horsepower block, this is still a really good upgrade for them to pick up.
Yep, absolutely. The drivability is perfect. You wouldn't even know you've changed anything. They work and they tune right in, no problem. Just give you all that extra fuel capacity that you need if you want to push these cars into higher power levels on ethanol.
Now, I do have a follow-up question about the pump. I know that like there's a couple other companies that have like in-tank pumps. Now, is that something that can still help for maybe lower horsepower numbers, but for people who aren't getting the injectors? Is that maybe another solution?
As far as we can tell, I haven't seen a limitation on the low side by itself. Even as we approach the limits of the stock high pressure pump and the stock injectors, we don't really notice anything that I would attribute directly back to low side. But we didn't know for sure because we didn't have any way to see the low side pressure. And now, thanks to Cobb, the next thing we're going to cover, we'll be able to see that. But I did have some people put some independent pressure gauges on and do some extra testing. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think the limitation is more so on the high pressure side when you're talking stock turbo. Now, these guys that have upgraded turbos, we are having them do upgraded low side pumps because that you're trying to produce mid 400s. There is a point where the low side pump won't keep up with that. It won't feed enough fuel to the high pressure pump and it'll starve, it'll cavitate, it'll drop pressure. So we are having guys do in-tank upgrades too. That's pretty much like if you're putting in a bigger DI fuel system, you better put in a bigger low side pump too. That's just kind of, they go hand in hand. If you need that much more fuel on your high side, you need to feed it more from your low side.
Okay, so it's a lot of these things are slowly starting to come together now. Like we had one part, now we got the other side, now we got the injectors. So slowly, and you're absolutely right. I know this is something that gets brought up a lot is the whole FA20 versus EJ25 thing that kept coming up. Like, well, why wouldn't you just build a V8 WRX? It's the same issue, right? It was very expensive, and if I remember correctly, I don't remember if they ever had upgraded injectors, but I know IBR had that fifth injector that would go into like the BRZ manifold.
Well, okay, so not quite. So Nostrum did produce some injectors for the FA20 engine, but as I said, in my testing, it was only about an 8 to 10% increase.
That's right.
So it was kind of hard to justify. It only gave you a little bit more. They did have a high pressure pump. It also does help keep up with the volumes. And then IBR, what they did was they made a secondary injection kit. So what they did was they put 4 port injectors using the BRZ manifold. So they added port injection on with this clever little controller. That controller plugs in between one of the direct injectors, and it monitors the pulse width of a direct injector. And when it gets to a certain point where the pulse widths get long enough, it knows it starts to need more fuel. It starts turning on and using the port injectors. The downside, there's a couple downsides with that system. One of them is that you're firing those port injectors in a batch, which means you're firing all 4 at the same time, regardless of valve position. So sometimes the valve is open and the fuel's going right in. Other times it's not. Now, that's not a huge deal. The fuel will hang out in there. It will get sucked in. It will work. When you're at higher RPMs and higher loads, batch firing injectors isn't a huge deal. And that's the only time those injectors come on. But the other part of the problem is that the stock ECU has no idea when those are turning on. And so we have to kind of fudge the tune and kind of carefully, compensate out some direct injection on the stock tune when we know the IBR kit's starting to spray. So I've worked with that kit a few times and it works, but it's brilliant engineering. Those guys are brilliant people, but it's clunky because of just the nature of it. It's not their fault. It's just clunky to add on a secondary controller. But yes, that exists. But again, just, none of those things. I can tell you that like I've never really done very many of those cars or seen very many of those cars done like that because they're just dollar for dollar. The power band you end up with is pretty ugly because it's only a 2-liter. So you got a 2-liter that you can't rev to high RPMs and you're having to do all this clunky stuff to get power out of it. People just gave up on it and got a different platform or got an STI, or they jumped into the FA24 WRX because now we got an engine that makes some torque and we got an engine that's strong. It doesn't break rods if something goes a little bit awry. It can survive. It can take some shit, if you will, compared to the FA20. So now the aftermarket really cares about this engine because it's got a lot more potential and ability to have a pretty meaty power band with the higher displacement.
I'm just glad to hear all that the car is going really well, because I haven't really had much of a time to talk to different tuners to find out like what's the pulse out there. Are things going wrong? Because like I actually hear more transmissions go bad than I do engines so far.
Yeah, I'd say I can think of about maybe four or five guys that have broken transmissions out of hundreds of guys we've tuned, because I do carefully limit the torque at lower RPM, and that's helpful. Most of the guys that broke their transmissions, a couple of them were pretty unexpected, but I would say at least the other few were like, yeah, I was power shifting this thing, racing a Hellcat, so I'm not surprised it broke, So there were some surprises and there were some not surprises, but haven't really seen a lot of broken transies if we limit the torque. So that's something that we do. So we've had good, again, just all around, just so few failures that I don't even know of any engine failures that have been brought to my attention. And I only know of a few transmission failures. Now I've seen people have come to me and said, yeah, my engine did fail. I blew a head gasket with tuner A or tuner B. So it is possible to break these engines. And I'm not saying it's the tuning necessarily. I'm just saying not under my care. I haven't seen it yet. So, but by and large, you really don't see a lot of blown engines out there every other day. Like, you think you might.
Yeah. I've been comparing this to like the 2015, 2016 WRX when it came out. And Naziok still has a lot of information about all the data is still there. People were talking, especially that first year. It can't say like a substantial amount, but considerably more than what we've seen in the FA24. So hey, that's good to know. Mine's still alive. My transmission is still fine. As far as I know, the engine is still fine. So you were talking about, and you kind of started talking about the low pressure sensor, which is the big deal that is now in the Flex Fuel kit. So have you gotten around to being able to tune any cars with the Flex kit so far?
Yes, we have. Yep, we had some guys pre-order the kits right away, and so we got to work on it immediately when the software came out. And yeah, it works great. It's set up exactly like Flex Fuel, the way Cobb always does it, which is basically where your tune becomes two tunes in one. They duplicate all of the important tables that have to change for ethanol. So your injection time, your fuel targets, your boost control, your ignition timing, your cranking fueling, your warm-up fueling, everything that's different for ethanol has its own separate set of tables that you tune. And then there's a set of tables that blends those together. So it's very familiar. So when I popped in there, it took me, less than 15 minutes to build the first one, because I know exactly how I like to do things for the FA20 engine. And it's going to be very similar approaches to my blend curves and everything else for the FA24. So I got some maps thrown together right away. The first several guys that we did were guys that already had full E85 tunes and full pump gas tunes. That makes it super simple, because I'm literally just grabbing those maps from each of the tunes and putting them together, and then here's your tune. They don't even necessarily have to they just run some data logs for me, and we check it out and just make sure everything makes sense. It acts exactly the same as it did on their E85 tune when they're on E85. It acts exactly the same as their pump gas tune. And if they're in the middle, they get a blend of the power, and that's something where, again, I'm just kind of using my knowledge and my experience from tuning direct injection engines for years now. I know where to put that stuff so that, E50 is pretty close to E60. As you kind of get closer to E40, E30, you taper down the power closer to 93 and everything's happy. So yeah, it works fantastic. And like you mentioned there, now we also get the low side pressure sensor. So if we are running low on the supply pressure, we'll know it now.
Yeah, because in the past, it's not something that we could actually see on the access port, right?
Correct. Yep, really it only has the high pressure, so we don't know what low pressure is doing. A lot of other types of cars have both, but Subaru decided that wasn't an important sensor. So
there's a lot of things they decide that aren't important. I feel like maybe are. So we kind of talked about this, but so I don't want to give people the misconception that just getting a Flex Fuel kit will change what your power is, right? So if you have an E85 tune, or maybe you didn't have an E85 tune, and now you're thinking, okay, well, I have a 93 tune. Now I feel comfortable with getting a Flex Fuel kit or an E85 tune. Now, let us know. Any power changes, anything at all? Does it change anything at all in your car if you either have one or you don't have one?
That's a great question. If you are already tuned on like full E85, whatever your pump is putting out, it might be putting out 65, maybe 75, maybe even 80. When we've done our full E85 tunes, we've encouraged guys to test their fuel. And so we know where it's at. And we recommend making sure it's at least above E60 and also making sure that it's not any higher. My comfortable level is about E75. I don't like more than that because it kind of puts some strain on the fuel system, on the stock fuel system at those higher ethanol blends, and there's no trade-off in power. Yeah. So we tell guys between 60 and 75 is where our E85 tune makes maximum power. If you're already on a tune like that and you add flex fuel, you're not going to gain any more power. You're just going to have the convenience to know where your ethanol's at, splash a little pump gas in if it gets too high, or go on a road trip and blend 93 in, or, use 93 when you want to. It's adding convenience for you. Now, if you're on 93 or 91, you've never had E85 because you weren't comfortable with having to mix or blend or use E40 maps, and you put flex fuel on it and we start tuning that thing up to E85, yeah, you're going to gain, 50, 60, 80 horsepower, depending on your mods. So flex fuel is going to be awesome for guys that weren't willing to do E85 until that was here, and now they get to. Maybe because, again, not comfortable mixing, or maybe because E85 is kind of hard to get where they are. And if you're somebody who's had an E40 tune, we did a lot of E40 tunes because it was a good middle of the road, super safe, super reliable. Also kind of a better blend of fuel economy for guys that are conscious of that. So any of our E40 guys that are adding flex fuel, they are going to gain some power because they're going to get to put more ethanol in it now and pick up an extra, maybe, again, 15 to 30 horsepower, maybe a bit more depending on their mods. If we have some guys that have been running E50, we had some guys do E50, they're going to be pretty close jumping to E85. It's not going to be as big of a jump as it is from pump gas to E85 or from E40 to E85. So the closer you get to those higher blends, you're not going to gain it. You're just getting the convenience.
Yeah. And I think that's really what most people, I mean, imagine if this flex fuel kit came out when the flash times were still 9 minutes. It seems like just yesterday, because I remember when I was on the dyno with you guys on too, I'd say we spent like 5 hours there, but an hour was spent just flashing maps. Like that is just...
Yeah, that was very painful.
That was...
And then, the other cool thing too that Cobb slipped in there while they did the flex fuel was there was something called a load limit. This is pretty common in, when you look at OEM tunes, is the load is basically how much airflow is going into the cylinder gets translated to a number, and that number gets used for, your ignition maps and your fuel maps and things like that. And also there can be limits to how high the load can go. So there were some hard-coded limits that existed that were pretty easy to touch on these cars. And if we were doing bigger turbos and stuff like that, we had to kind of scale everything down and fudge some of the numbers to get under those limits. Cobb raised those limits while they were in there. They recoded it so that we can go up to a much higher load now as well. So kind of a nice little Easter egg that they put in there while they were doing that.
Is that similar to like what would happen when I was on 93 and it would hit like a boost limit? I remember I got that like a few times.
Yeah, where I cut the throttle and be really weird. So that could have been touching that load limit. So we had to start kind of like compensating for that. But then we discovered another interesting thing is actually something that I would honestly take credit for pointing out to Cobb and asked Cobb to go looking for it. And they found it. And I said, look, there's something with these cars. When you hammer down in first gear and you accelerate really quickly, I don't know what's going on, but it triggers this cut. And it only happens if you really hammer it in first gear. And they're like, that's weird. You sure it's not a tune issue or a torque issue or something? And I worked around it by basically making it so people couldn't hammer on it in first, which kind of sucks because, I got around it by slowing down how much you can whack on it in first, and that would solve it. But I knew there was something there. And Cobb went looking, and they found an acceleration limit that exists. Yeah. Basically, it's kind of like it's kind of a check to make sure that like if the car is rocketing off faster than it should be, it's going to shut things down because something's not right. Maybe the pedal got stuck, or who knows. Like ever since the Toyota Prius ran away and hit somebody, there's been all this bullshit.
I forgot about that.
Been all this bullshit they put in the tune to make sure it doesn't happen again. But for whatever reason, there's an acceleration limit that you put these cars enough power, you really let it jack off, take off, jack the pedal and take off in first gear. It can trigger that limit. So Cobb found that limit and gave us a way to basically kind of bypass it after I asked for it. And some other, other guys had mentioned it too. I'm not going to say I'm the only one that realized something was going on, but I was the one that kind of pushed pretty hard at the end, was like, guys, there's something here. It's not the tune. Please go looking for this. And they did, and they found it. So they fixed that.
Now, was that something that was present on the stock map as well?
Yes. It's present in the stock tune. It was present in the Cobb tunes because they hadn't looked for it.
Okay.
So it existed. They found it, and they basically opened up a table where you can control what RPM it ignores that limit. Mm-hmm. And you can basically set that RPM up to like 8,000 RPM so that there's never a point where
you're going to hit it. Yeah.
It doesn't do the check. It basically bypasses the check for acceleration.
That's really interesting.
Cobb patched that in for us not too long ago, which is cool.
I'm just wondering how many races I lost because of that.
It's possible.
Because I did a lot of launches. That's really interesting. Anything? So is there anything else that's changed in the last few months in tuning? I know last year we talked about how there was that injector flow, that there was a limit on that they increased the injector window for that.
Yeah, no, it wasn't actually increasing it. What it was they didn't understand the way the direct injection timing was being what's the word? Let's call it displayed or used. In other words, so it's like when you look at a tune, you're not reading numbers. You're reading what looks like the matrix, right?
Yeah.
It's in hex.
Yeah.
So it's hexadecimal code essentially. That's all procedural. So when they reverse engineer things and they make connections, it's a super complex process. Mm-hmm. So they'll spot these tables and they'll look at them, and sometimes they can translate the hex to a number. So let's say they look at this table and okay, well, there's the RPM, there's the load. This number translates to 320. So they assume, and that's degrees. So they assume that spot is 320 degrees of injection angle, right? Mm-hmm. But there could be some other table that adds to it, or some other value that multiplies it or divides it, and it isn't really 320 when it goes into being commanded. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they found the table for injection basically when you start the injection, and they exposed it to us, and we could start tuning it. But we all noticed really quickly, if you touch this more than just a little bit, it gets pissed. I think we tested that one time on your car, and it got pissed. And so it was like, nope, something's not right with this. And so pretty much all of us told Cobb, like, this isn't working. Don't. Yeah. So when they put this stuff in there, sometimes it's in there as like a beta. They'll tell us tuners like, hey, we don't know for sure. You can play with this, but be careful. And so that's why I'm always really careful. I use a fucker like you, to test it out.
And that's really good though, because like it's one thing though, and then people test it internally, because like we did this all the time in IT, and you got to remember this too. It's different when something goes out and everyone starts messing with it, because then you really start seeing like what you missed or what you didn't miss.
That's why we don't send things out. We don't send things out until we've tested we have a very small group of internal testing cars. Mm-hmm. Then I have a bit larger group of kind of like beta testing guys that I trust and they trust me. And then it slowly starts to trickle out to the public. And anytime I send out, kind of any of these new types of updates in my ticket system and my tunes, I put those in a special category so I can pay close attention to those guys and make sure that everything's normal. And then once that kind of passes all those tests, then it finds its way into the base tunes for everybody. So it's just like software iteration. Mm-hmm. You try it on your own computer. If it doesn't blow up, you try it on, the test computer. If it doesn't blow up, you move it out to the testing server cloud, right? Mm-hmm. If that works, then you put it in production. It's the same idea. That's my software engineering background has led me to that process of tuning cars, because that's kind of how you got to do it. But anyway, we getting off the rails there.
We always do.
Injection. Cobb had the table there, but it didn't work, and we knew it because they figured out that it wasn't the numbers. The numbers looked like they would be start of injection, but they weren't quite right. So they fixed that and displayed it correctly, and now it works correctly. So now we can actually adjust the injection window. We can start the injection sooner, which gives us more time to spray, which is helpful, because Subarus don't have a cutoff limit. A lot of other ECUs, they'll clip. They call it clipping. They'll clip the end of injection. So even if you ask for all this fuel if it's gonna run too long and it's gonna interfere with the spark, the ECU will cut it off and let the car run lean, because to some degree that's better than having it run into the spark, which can cause disastrous effects.
Yeah.
Or what will happen, for example, like if my Ford Raptor has a very intelligent ECU in there. It watches the direct injection and the port injection, and if they're getting to their limits, it'll pull the boost down. So when I run my truck on full E85 and it's really cold out, like 0 degrees, it'll only be making 12 or 13 PSI near red line with the boost pressure, because that's all it has the fuel for. Mm-hmm. If I take it up to warmer weather, I run 17, 18 PSI up there because I've got the fuel for it. So Ford ECUs are very intelligent. They'll clip the injection, they'll lower the boost, they'll do all these things. A Subaru ECU won't do that. We can tell it when to start the injection. We can start it sooner. We have to be careful not to start it too soon, but we can start it sooner. That'll help. We have to pay attention to when it ends, though, because if it doesn't end in time, we've got problems. So, but Cobb did get that table corrected, working correctly, and we utilize that now with our ethanol tunes and our big turbo cars, and it works fantastic.
Okay, so that's good. So this should help alleviate some of the issues that people have who have been hearing about people getting tuned in the past and haven't gotten tuned just yet, that things have gotten better. Cobb has gotten better. Tuners are obviously more knowledgeable and more experienced with what they're doing, so there's less of an issue. We have more fuel coming out. We've got deep pockets for it. There's a lot of there's a lot of good things coming out for the car, and I'm actually thankful, because like it is, I think, a fantastic car, and there's still so much room to grow, and I look forward to seeing what more and more shops do. I know TPG or TGP. This is TPG.
TPG, yes.
Yeah, TPG. I've been seeing their car was one that was running like most of these parts in them, and just making like crazy power and doing crazy stuff at the drag strip, which was cool to see. So I look forward to seeing more of those cars happen. So
yeah, me as well.
Anyway, this was a short one, but I think there was a lot of really important stuff to talk about. So again, Graham, thank you so much for coming out. If people are looking for a knee tune, where can they go?
To our website, boostedperformancetuning.com, there on the shirt. So yeah, hit us up on there. You can email us if you prefer to text. We have a text number that you can text us at. You can also find me pretty easily on Facebook. I've got a business Facebook account that I use if you prefer to chat on Facebook. So any of those ways is fine to get a hold of us.
Perfect. And I'll put the link down in the description as well. And if you guys have any other questions, you can reach out to me. I do my best. I almost feel like the help desk for most tuners. Like, people ask a lot of questions. I'm like, you know what? I think I have some of enough knowledge to be able to at least guide you in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyway, Graham, thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.